Welcome to Nocturne Historia, across the golden plains of Anatolia, where the Black Sea whispers to the Mediterranean and three continents nearly touch. A forgotten frontier gave rise to one of the greatest empires the world would ever know. This was a land of crossroads, where civilizations clashed and converged for millennia. It was here, amidst the fading glory of Byzantium and the waning shadow of the Mongols, that a small Turkish tribe laid the first stones of destiny. The late 13th century marked a world in flux. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate was crumbling, fractured by internal strife, and still reeling from Mongol invasions. Anatolia had become a mosaic of competing principalities and warlords. But in the northwestern borderlands, nestled between rugged hills and fertile plains, opportunity waited for those bold enough to seize it. Among the many tribal leaders, the Beys, one would rise above the rest. His name was Osman. From modest beginnings, his descendants would build a legacy that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But the Ottomans didn't merely conquer. They assimilated, adapted, and transformed. They inherited the administrative systems of Byzantium, the courtly culture of Persia, the spiritual scholarship of the Arab world, and the warrior spirit of Central Asian nomads. These influences did not dilute their identity. They sharpened it. In Ottoman hands, disparate traditions became a synthesis unlike anything before. Their cities pulsed with diversity, markets overflowed with spices, silks, and stories from Venice to Samarkand. Mosques, palaces, and bathhouses bore the marks of Islamic geometry and classical grace. Calligraphers painted with brushes finer than a strand of hair. Poets wove verses worthy of sultans. Religions coexisted, imperfectly, yes, but in ways remarkable for their time. Jews, Christians, and Muslims shared neighborhoods and commerce under the imperial crescent. This was not just a realm of warriors, but of philosophers, architects, and statesmen. The Ottomans expanded rapidly, stabilized efficiently, and declined slowly, tracing a pattern common to all great empires. Yet their legacy endured. You can taste it in the kitchens of the Balkans, walk beneath it in the domes of Istanbul, and feel it in the politics of the Middle East. The Ottomans shaped the world we live in, its borders, its tensions, its connections. And it all began on a windswept frontier where one man's ambition found fertile soil amid the ruins of fallen powers. This is the story of how a tribe became an empire and how that empire continues to echo through the ages. On the restless frontier of Anatolia, power was held by ambitious lords who led bands of mounted warriors known as Ghazis, men fueled by both religious zeal and a desire for new land and spoils. Among them was Ertugrul, a tribal chief whose people had fled west to escape the Mongol advance. For his loyalty to the Seljuk Sultan, Ertugrul was granted land near the town of Soğut, close to Byzantine territory. There, his tribe slowly transitioned from a life of nomadic herding to farming and frontier raiding. When Ertugrul died around 1281, his modest domain passed to his son, Osman Bey. Osman did not start as the wealthiest or most powerful of the frontier lords, but he possessed something rarer, a charismatic presence, sharp political instincts, and the wisdom to know that lasting success required more than martial strength. Osman built alliances through marriage, welcomed skilled refugees from Mongol-ruled lands, and even incorporated Byzantine defectors into his growing state. In contrast to many rivals, who ravaged all before them, Osman adopted a policy of relative tolerance toward Christian villagers who accepted his rule. Those who submitted were protected and taxed, while only those who resisted faced the sword. This pragmatic, inclusive approach began to shape the Ottoman state in its earliest days. Local Greek, Armenian, and Turkish peasants often preferred Ottoman authority to that of Byzantine landlords or competing Turkish beys, finding Osman's tax policies less oppressive. This pattern, military expansion blended with administrative inclusion and the incorporation of conquered peoples, became a lasting hallmark of Ottoman governance. Ottoman tradition recounts a fateful dream that came to Osman early in his rule. In it, he saw a mighty tree spring from his body, its branches spreading across the world, shading mountains and rivers, symbols of vast lands and peoples. When Osman told this dream to the Sufi mystic Sheikh Edebali, whose daughter he wished to marry, the holy man interpreted it as a divine promise of empire. Whether historical or legend, this vision provided a powerful sense of purpose, casting Osman's dynasty as the rightful heirs to a God-ordained destiny. a myth invoked by generations of Ottoman sultans to justify their claim as leaders of the Islamic world. Osman's early military campaigns were modest but strategic. He targeted Byzantine castles and towns near Suez, steadily expanding his influence and drawing new warriors to his cause. By 1299, Osman was strong enough to declare independence from the crumbling Seljuk Sultanate, a moment traditionally seen as the birth of the Ottoman state. His followers began calling themselves Ottomans, the people of Osman. The nascent Ottoman realm was organized around military needs, keeping much of its nomadic Turkish heritage while absorbing Byzantine and Seljuk administrative techniques. The Ghazi warriors who formed the backbone of the army were rewarded with land in conquered regions, becoming a class of mounted soldier landholders who could be called to arms when needed. New markets grew around frontier strongholds, and a simple but effective bureaucracy took root. Religious institutions also played a key role in forging the early Ottoman state. Osman cultivated ties with Sufi brotherhoods, especially the dervishes, whose mystical Islam appealed to both Turks and converts. Dervish lodges became hubs for spiritual life and cultural assimilation, helping to integrate local populations into the Ottoman world. Through a blend of ambition, pragmatism, and inclusiveness, Osman laid the foundations for an empire that would shape history for centuries to come. In the early 14th century, the foundations of the Ottoman state were set not just by conquest, but by a careful blend of faith, strategy, and adaptation. Islamic law provided the essential framework for governance, but in these early years, the Ottomans applied it with pragmatic flexibility, navigating the realities of a region in flux. As the Byzantine Empire weakened, Osman's forces steadily pushed deeper into imperial territory, signaling a new era on the Anatolian frontier. The turning point came in 1301 when Osman's army confronted and decisively defeated a Byzantine force at the Battle of Bapheus. This was no mere skirmish. It demonstrated that the Ottomans had evolved from small-scale raiders into a formidable military power, capable of facing and overcoming imperial armies in open battle. Osman's son Orhan, a commander of great promise, soon emerged as a key leader in these campaigns. Father and son worked together, systematically capturing Byzantine strongholds across northwestern Anatolia, their greatest challenge being the wealthy and strategically important city of Bursa. The siege of Bursa was long and difficult. Osman directed its early phases, but as the city held out, fate intervened. Osman fell gravely ill in 1323 or 1324. As the end approached, he summoned Orhan and offered his final counsel, advice that would echo through Ottoman chronicles for centuries. Rule your subjects with justice, advance the faith with the sword, and honor men of learning. With quiet dignity, Osman died in his humble wooden home at Sogut, leaving behind not only territory but a vision for future generations. Orhan completed the conquest of Bursa in 1326, making it the first true capital of the Ottoman state. Fulfilling his father's last wish, legend holds that Orhan brought news of Bursa's fall to Osman's tomb, a gesture marking the transition from one era to another. The modest beylik that Osman had carved out by courage and charisma was now transformed into a principality of genuine significance. Bursa's green hills, dotted with sacred tombs and newly rising mosques, became the heart of the Ottoman world. From Osman's early dreams, his descendants would forge a power destined to endure for 6 centuries. The sword of Osman, which would be ceremonially girded upon each new sultan, came to symbolize legitimate rule and dynastic continuity passed down through generations of conquerors, poets, and reformers. No one at that moment could have imagined that the seeds planted in these years would one day grow into an empire stretching across 3 continents, shaping the fate of the world. The conquest of Bursa was both an ending and a beginning, the realization of Osman's vision and the dawn of a new era under Orhan's leadership. Over his 36-year reign, Orhan inherited not only territory but also his father's keen political insight and gift for institution building. Establishing his court in Bursa, Orhan set about transforming the Ottomans from a loose confederation of frontier warriors into a state with lasting structure. The influx of wealth and prestige brought new challenges as the Ottomans now ruled over diverse populations, both Turkish and non-Turkish, Muslim and non-Muslim. To meet these demands, Orhan introduced lasting reforms. He commissioned the minting of the first Ottoman coins, symbols of independent sovereignty, and established a basic chancellery that blended Persian and Byzantine administrative practices. He also converted churches into mosques and built new religious complexes, including the magnificent Green Mosque, whose architecture announced the dynasty's imperial ambitions. Military reform was equally crucial. While the Ghazi cavalry retained its status, Orhan recognized the need for regular infantry capable of both siege warfare and territorial defense. Around 1330, he created the Yayha Corps, the first paid Turkish infantry soldiers to serve the state, marking the beginning of a professional Ottoman army. In these formative years, the Ottomans laid the groundwork for an empire that would reshape not only the map of the region, but also the course of world history. One of the most significant legacies of early Ottoman rule was the creation of the Janissary Corps, a force that would reshape the empire's destiny for centuries to come. Imagine an army built from the sons of Christian peasants, taken as boys from remote villages, converted to Islam, and subjected to some of the most demanding military training the world had ever seen. This practice, which became formalized as the Devshirme system, is controversial to modern eyes, but in its time, it represented a rare ladder out of obscurity. Many Christian families, facing lives of hardship and limited opportunity, actually sought out the Janissary system, hoping it would bring their sons power and a measure of influence unimaginable at home. The Janissaries would become fiercely loyal to the Sultan and form the backbone of Ottoman military might, rising to be one of history's most formidable fighting forces. While Orhan, the second great Ottoman leader, consolidated control in Anatolia, his gaze was fixed firmly across the narrow waters that separated Asia from Europe. The Byzantine Empire still held Constantinople and territories in the Balkans, but its glory days were long past. Byzantine politics had grown dangerously unstable, racked by dynastic feuds and civil war. In 1346, the embattled Emperor John VI Kantakouzenos, desperate for allies, made a fateful choice. He called for Ottoman military support and offered his daughter Theodora's hand in marriage to Orhan. This invitation provided the opening the Ottomans had been waiting for. Fate intervened again just a few years later, when an earthquake in 1354 shattered the defenses of key Byzantine fortresses along the Dardanelles. Orhan's son, Süleyman Pasha, acted swiftly, seizing the fortress of Simpe and then the city of Gallipoli. For the first time, Ottoman troops had a permanent foothold in Europe, a bridgehead from which they would launch a campaign to conquer the Balkans. Tragically, Süleyman would not live to see the fruits of his victory, dying in a hunting accident shortly after, but his brother, Murad, would pick up where he left off. Ascending to the throne in 1362, Murad transformed the Ottomans from a regional power into a true empire that straddled two continents. His strategy was clear: expand in both Europe and Anatolia, always pressing the advantage. The Ottoman armies swept through the Thrace, capturing Adrianople, known to the Turks as Edirne, in 1369. Murad was so impressed by its location that he moved his capital there, a symbolic gesture showing the empire's new European focus. From Edirne, Ottoman forces pushed deeper into Bulgaria, Serbia, and Macedonia, sending shockwaves across the Christian world. Alarmed by the rapid advance, the Balkan states formed a coalition led by the formidable Serbian prince, Lazar. Their forces met the Ottomans on June 15, 1389, at Kosovo Field, one of the most pivotal battles in medieval history. Although the details of that day have been clouded by centuries of myth, what is certain is that both Murad and Lazar lost their lives. Murad falling to an assassin who feigned defection, Lazar executed after the battle. But the Ottoman victory shattered organized resistance in the Balkans for decades. In the chaos, Murad's son Bayezid seized command, securing his claim by executing his own brother, a brutal act that set the precedent for fratricide among Ottoman sultans, a practice aimed at preventing civil war. Bayezid, soon known as the Thunderbolt for his rapid military campaigns, wasted no time. Over the next 13 years, he transformed the Balkans. Serbia and Bulgaria became vassal states, and his armies pressed deep into Wallachia and Bosnia. In 1396, when a crusading army led by King Sigismund of Hungary marched to push the Ottomans out of Europe, Bayezid crushed them at the Battle of Nicopolis. Most captured knights were executed, earning Bayezid a fearsome reputation in the West. Meanwhile, unlike his cautious predecessors, Bayezid pursued a policy of swift conquest in Anatolia's soils, uniting the region with a speed and aggression that shocked his contemporaries. Through a blend of innovation, ruthless ambition, and uncanny timing, the Ottomans had become not just a regional power, but a rising empire poised to dominate both East and West. After a period of rapid expansion, the Ottoman state found itself at a critical crossroads. Bayezid I, often called the Thunderbolt, launched an aggressive campaign to unite the various Turkish principalities across Anatolia, nearly doubling the size of Ottoman territory by 1390. These bold advances inevitably brought the Ottomans into conflict with a new Eastern superpower. Timur, the Central Asian conqueror who traced his lineage to Genghis Khan and had built an empire stretching from India to the Mediterranean. Bayezid was not content merely with conquest. He sought to strengthen and modernize the Ottoman state from within, curbing the power of semi-independent frontier lords and expanding a centralized Persian-influenced bureaucracy. The establishment of new madrasas promoted Islamic learning, while a nascent Ottoman navy marked the first step toward maritime ambitions that would later define the empire. Yet, for all his energy and ability, Bayezid's reach may have exceeded his grasp. As he besieged Constantinople, determined to achieve the glory that had eluded his forebears, he was forced to abandon the siege by news of Timur's approaching armies. Timur, provoked by Bayezid's aggression toward Turkish rulers under his protection, invaded Anatolia. The inevitable clash came at Ankara in July 1402. Despite the Byzantine reputation of the Ottoman forces, Timur's army proved superior, not only in numbers but also in tactical skill. Crucially, resentment among Bayezid's own Turkish troops over his centralization policies led some to defect during the battle, turning the confrontation into a devastating rout. Bayezid was captured and, according to legend, spent his remaining days in a cage in Timur's camp. The defeat at Ankara nearly shattered the Ottoman state. Timur restored independence to the principalities Bayezid had conquered, divided Anatolia among Bayezid's sons, and installed his own preferred ruler in the European domains. With Timur's departure, the Ottoman lands fell into a chaotic civil war, as Bayezid's sons vied for supremacy, a period known as the Interregnum, lasting from 1402 to 1413. For over a decade, it seemed that a century of Ottoman progress might be lost forever. It was Bayezid's son, Mehmed I, who would painstakingly reunite the empire. By employing patience and political skill, Mehmed reclaimed both the Anatolian and European territories, though he was forced to acknowledge some losses and accept the suzerainty of Timur's heirs over parts of Anatolia. By his death in 1421, Mehmed had stabilized the Ottomans and laid the foundation for future expansion. His successor, Murad II, inherited a state restored but still fragile. Over 3 decades, Murad worked steadily to consolidate control, reabsorb rebellious principalities, and rebuild Ottoman institutions. In Europe, he faced formidable opponents, including the legendary János Hunyadi of Hungary and Skanderbeg of Albania, both of whom mounted determined resistance to Ottoman advance. Despite these setbacks, Murad's perseverance enabled the Ottomans to retain and even extend their European territories. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its dominion shrinking to little more than Constantinople and a handful of outposts. This survival owed more to Ottoman distractions than to Byzantine strength. In 1444, a major crusading army led by Hungary sought to drive the Ottomans from the Balkans, but was decisively defeated by Murad at the Battle of Varna, ending serious European efforts to reclaim lost lands. When Murad died in 1451, his 19-year-old son Mehmed II, already tested in leadership, assumed the throne. Now, the long Ottoman struggle to claim Constantinople, so often attempted, so often frustrated, would reach its climax. To the Turks, the city was the fabled red apple, the ultimate symbol of power and legitimacy. Mehmed, unlike his ancestors, would approach this goal with meticulous planning and unwavering focus. The conquest of Constantinople, finally within reach, would signal the end of Byzantium and the dawn of an Ottoman Golden Age. It would mark a turning point not only for the Ottomans themselves, but for world history, as an old era ended and a new empire began to shape the fate of 2 continents. A century and a quarter after Osman's death, the Ottomans had transformed from a frontier principality into a formidable global force. Their rise had been fueled by military acumen, administrative innovation, and an uncanny ability to adapt after devastating setbacks. By the mid-15th century, They had created a hybrid civilization, combining Turkish vigor, Islamic faith, Persian sophistication, and Byzantine statecraft. Now, under the leadership of a young and determined sultan, their gaze turned to the ultimate prize, Constantinople. For over 1,000 years, this city had stood unbroken. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE, Constantinople had weathered centuries of wars, plagues, and sieges. Its mighty walls loomed above the Bosphorus, guardians of Eastern Rome's legacy. By 1453, it had become a shadow of its former self. Its territory reduced, its wealth diminished, but its symbolic power undiminished. Behind those walls, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos commanded a mere 7,000 defenders. Against him stood an empire reborn. Mehmed II had become sultan again in 1451, still only 19, but hardened by earlier experience. Those who mistook his age for weakness would soon regret it. Brilliant, resolute, and visionary, Mehmed made it clear. What his ancestors attempted through countless campaigns, he would achieve with a single, decisive strike. He obsessed over Constantinople, not just for its strategic value, but for the eternal prestige its conquest would bring. He studied its defenses, learned from the failures of past assaults, and began meticulous preparations. In 1452, he ordered the construction of Rumela Hisara, a massive fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, across from the older Anatolian fortress. Together they formed a chokehold Mehmed called the Throat Cutter. No ship could pass without Ottoman permission. When a Venetian vessel dared to defy the blockade, its crew was executed, its captain impaled, a grisly warning to all. Within Constantinople, anxiety mounted. Emperor Constantine appealed desperately to the West, even agreeing to reunite the Orthodox and Catholic churches, a decision met with deep resentment by his people, who still remembered the Latin sack of 1204. But help came slowly and in small numbers. A few hundred soldiers arrived from Genoa and Venice, along with Giovanni Giustiniani, a brilliant Genoese engineer who took charge of reinforcing the city's walls. Meanwhile, Mehmed's preparations grew in scale and ambition. He assembled an army of 80,000, elite janissaries, Anatolian cavalry, Balkan auxiliaries, a multinational force united by a common cause. To breach the legendary Theodosian walls, Mehmed needed more than manpower. He needed firepower. Enter Urban, a Hungarian cannon founder. Rejected by the Byzantines for his steep fees, Urban offered his services to Mehmed instead. The result was a monster, a cannon capable of launching stone projectiles weighing up to 1,500 pounds. When it fired, the ground trembled, and the age of medieval fortifications quaked with it. The stage was set. On one side, a dying empire clinging to memory. On the other, a rising star determined to change the course of history. The siege of Constantinople, and with it, the fate of East and West, was about to begin. The siege of Constantinople in 1453 unfolded as one of the most dramatic chapters in world history, marked by technological innovation, relentless determination, and the last stand of a fading empire. Among the most awe-inspiring weapons brought by the Ottomans was the basilica cannon, so massive it took 60 oxen to move, and so powerful its roar could be heard miles away. This monstrous gun, accompanied by dozens of other formidable cannons, was unlike anything the defenders of Constantinople had ever faced. The city's medieval walls, built for an earlier age of warfare, trembled under the thunderous bombardment. On the seas, Mehmed II's navy, over 120 ships strong, completed the encirclement. Even though the Byzantines stretched a heavy chain across the Golden Horn to block the harbor, Mehmed's naval blockade ensured that no relief or supplies could reach the beleaguered city. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman army took its position before the legendary walls. Mehmed sent a final offer: surrender, and the emperor and his people would be spared. Constantine XI, the last Byzantine emperor, replied with dignity he would not yield. The siege began in earnest. For weeks, Ottoman cannons hammered the city's land walls, especially the vulnerable Theodosian sector. Each night, Byzantine engineers worked feverishly to fill the breaches with anything at hand: stones, wood, barrels, even earth packed with fabric. Several Ottoman attempts to storm these weakened sections were thrown back with heavy losses, as the defenders fought with the desperation of those who have no hope but courage. Yet the pressure mounted. Realizing he needed to break the stalemate, Mehmed devised a plan as audacious as it was effective. His engineers constructed a greased wooden track across the Galata Peninsula. In a single night, Ottoman ships were hauled overland from the Bosphorus and launched into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain that had shielded the harbor. At dawn on April 22nd, the defenders were stunned to see Ottoman ships where none should have been. The Byzantines responded with a daring night raid to burn these ships, but the attack failed and the brave sailors captured were executed. Despite repeated Ottoman assaults, the city held, though at a terrible cost. The defenders, outnumbered and exhausted, faced shrinking supplies and dwindling hope. By late May, constant bombardment had left the walls dangerously weakened. Mehmed summoned his commanders and announced a final assault, promising his troops 3 days of plunder and special rewards for those who would be first to breach the city. Inside Constantinople, Constantine Lelepin called his own war council. He addressed his commanders with a moving speech, reminding them of their duty and the legacy of Christian civilization. He walked the ramparts, encouraging his men before joining both Orthodox and Catholic clergy in a final prayer at Hagia Sophia. The unity of purpose, if only for a moment, inspired the exhausted defenders. In the pre-dawn hours of May 29th, the last battle began. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops hurled themselves at the battered walls. The first attack by irregulars was beaten back. The second by Anatolian soldiers also failed. Finally, the elite Janissaries pressed their attack at the gate of St. Romanus, where the walls were weakest. In the chaos, Giovanni Giustiniani, the famed Genoese commander, was gravely wounded and carried away from the walls, spreading panic among the defenders. A small postern gate left open during the confusion was discovered by Ottoman troops, providing the breach they needed to pour into the city and seal its fate. In the tense final hours of Constantinople, Ottoman Janissaries managed to breach the formidable walls near the Blokernay Palace, raising the empire's banners over the ancient battlements and signaling the collapse of resistance across the city. Emperor Constantine XI, confronted with the reality of imminent defeat, cast aside his imperial regalia and led a final desperate charge against the invading Ottomans, determined to meet his end as a soldier rather than surrender to his enemies. Though his body would never be conclusively identified, Sultan Mehmed II would later ensure a respectful burial for the man widely believed to be the last Byzantine emperor. By midday, the city's fate was sealed. Mehmed II entered Constantinople on horseback, riding directly to Hagia Sophia, the most iconic church of Eastern Christianity. There he halted a soldier who was damaging the marble floor, declaring that the buildings of the city belonged to him alone. Without delay, he ordered the Grand Basilica converted into a mosque, a powerful and unmistakable symbol of the Ottoman victory over Eastern Christendom. In accordance with the customs of medieval warfare, 3 days of sanctioned looting followed. Priceless treasures were either destroyed or carried away. Thousands of citizens were enslaved, and many of the city's buildings suffered irreparable damage. Yet Mehmed's true vision was not one of destruction, but of transformation. When the period of plunder ended, the Sultan immediately began rebuilding Constantinople as the new Ottoman capital. He moved quickly to repopulate the devastated city, inviting former residents to return and bringing in Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across his empire. To ensure religious continuity for the Christian population, Mehmed appointed a new Orthodox patriarch, Gennadius Scalarius, and offered guarantees for the survival of the church under Ottoman rule. Tax incentives revived commercial activity, while ambitious construction projects transformed the skyline with Ottoman architectural flourishes. Over time, the city gradually became known as Istanbul, though both names would endure for generations. The conquest sent shockwaves through Europe. Pope Nicholas V called for a crusade to reclaim the city, but Western Europe was increasingly focused on its own rivalries and the opportunities of Atlantic exploration, leaving the plea unanswered. For the Islamic world, Mehmed's triumph was celebrated as the fulfillment of the Prophet Muhammad's hadith, promising the conquest of Constantinople. For the Ottomans themselves, it marked a watershed moment. No longer a frontier principality or regional power, the state had become a true empire with a cosmopolitan capital bridging Europe and Asia. Mehmed II, adopting the title Caesar, positioned himself as the legitimate successor to the ancient line of Roman emperors. The Sultan's gamble had paid off, and his conquest of Constantinople became the event for which history would most remember him. The moment that ended a thousand-year-old empire and opened a new era for the region. As the call to prayer rang out for the first time from the minarets of Hagia Sophia, the medieval order faded, replaced by the dawn of Ottoman supremacy. The Eastern Roman Empire was no more. In its place, the Ottoman Empire stood ready for its golden age, prepared to shape the destinies of three continents for centuries to come. In the decades that followed, the empire entered a period historians would later call its golden age. From the mid-15th through the 16th centuries, a succession of extraordinary sultans expanded Ottoman territories, crafted sophisticated systems of government, and inspired a flourishing of culture and the arts. Under their leadership, the empire reached the height of its power and prosperity, standing as one of the most formidable states in the world. Mehmed II, emboldened by his triumph, continued his campaigns of conquest until his death in 1481, subduing the last Byzantine outposts in the Black Sea, conquering Serbia, pushing deep into Greece and Albania, and building a navy capable of challenging Venetian power throughout the Aegean. The transformation begun with the fall of Constantinople would lay the foundations for an empire whose influence would reverberate for centuries. When we look back at the age of Mehmed the Conqueror, we see the final act in the centuries-long story of Turkish unification. Mehmed did what no one had managed since the Seljuks. He brought all the independent Turkish beyliks under a single banner, forging a truly unified state in Anatolia. By the end of his reign, the Ottoman realm had more than doubled in size. But Mehmed's vision extended far beyond mere military conquest. He set out to build an enduring empire, reorganizing Ottoman administration on more centralized, rational lines. Gone was the chaotic authority of the frontier lords and old Turkish aristocracy. In their place stood a new system, deeply influenced by Byzantine, Islamic, and Turkish traditions. Mehmed's own law code, the Kanunname, provided a stable, clear hierarchy that would guide the empire for generations. As a patron of art and learning, Mehmed worked to make Constantinople a true imperial capital. He commissioned the magnificent Topkapi Palace, transforming the city's skyline. Libraries, religious schools, and hospitals sprang up across the city. Mehmed himself was more than a conqueror. He wrote poetry, spoke several languages, and invited artists and scholars from all over the world, including Gentile Bellini from Italy. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all found a place at his court, reflecting the pluralistic spirit of his empire. With Mehmed's death, the throne passed to his son, Bayezid II, after a brief but intense succession struggle with his brother Jem. Unlike his father, Bayezid was not constantly at war. For over 30 years, he favored stability over conquest, overseeing a period of peace and internal development. Recognizing the importance of naval power, Bayezid expanded the Ottoman fleet, challenging European rivals across the Mediterranean. One of his most remarkable acts was to welcome thousands of Jews expelled from Spain in 1492. These newcomers brought new skills in medicine, trade, and crafts, enriching the Ottoman world. Bayezid was also drawn to mysticism, supporting Sufi foundations and sponsoring religious scholarship. As he aged, however, a familiar Ottoman pattern returned. His sons began to vie for the throne. Among them, Selim, the ambitious governor of Trabzon, chafed at his father's caution, especially as the new threat of Safavid Persia rose to the east. Supported by the Janissaries, Selim forced Bayezid to abdicate in 1512. Ruthlessly, Selim eliminated his brothers and nephews, securing his rule and marking the beginning of a reign defined by relentless expansion. Selim, known to history as the Grim, set his sights first on Persia. The Safavid dynasty under Shah Ismail was spreading Shiite Islam and gaining influence among Turkish tribes in Anatolia. At the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, Selim's modern artillery and Janissary firepower shattered the Safavid cavalry, securing the empire's eastern frontier and defining the rough border between Turkey and Iran that endures today. But Selim's ambitions did not end there. He swept southward, turning against the Mamluk Sultanate, rulers of Egypt, Syria, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. In two campaigns of breathtaking speed, Ottoman armies took Syria in 1516 and Egypt in 1517, capturing Cairo and ending centuries of Mamluk rule. This victory brought the keys to Islam's holiest sites into Ottoman hands. The last Abbasid caliph, a figurehead kept by the Mamluks, ceremonially transferred the symbols of the caliphate to Selim. Though its legal legitimacy was debated, this moment was crucial for Ottoman claims to be leaders of the Sunni Muslim world. With Egypt's rich farmlands now theirs, the Ottomans gained immense new resources, taxes, trade, and a vast Arab population to govern. Control of the Red Sea opened access to the Indian Ocean, giving the empire a global dimension. When Selim died suddenly in 1520, he left to his son Suleiman a powerful, unified, and incredibly wealthy empire, its borders secure and its legitimacy newly enhanced. It was Suleiman who would take this inheritance and over the course of nearly 50 years, guide the Ottomans to the very height of their power and cultural brilliance. The accession of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1520 marked the beginning of a new era for the Ottoman Empire, one defined by military conquest, administrative reform, and cultural brilliance. At just 25 years old, Suleiman was already seasoned in governance, having been educated in the rigorous palace school and entrusted with the administration of provinces as a governor. He wasted little time in demonstrating his leadership. In 1521, he took Belgrade, a fortress that had resisted Ottoman arms for generations. The following year, after a brutal 6-month siege, his forces captured the island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller, ending a significant Christian presence in the eastern Mediterranean and securing Ottoman control of the sea lanes. With the frontier secure, Suleiman's gaze shifted northward, toward Hungary, the bulwark of Christian Europe. In 1526, at the Battle of Mohacs, the Ottoman army inflicted a crushing defeat on the Hungarians, slaying King Louis II and much of the country's aristocracy. Hungary was left shattered and divided. The Ottomans directly ruled the central territories. The Habsburgs claimed the western regions, and the Principality of Transylvania emerged as a semi-independent buffer state. By this point, the Ottoman frontier reached deep into Central Europe, altering the balance of power on the continent. In 1529, Suleiman marshaled an enormous host and marched on Vienna, the Habsburg capital. Though the siege ultimately failed due to unseasonably harsh weather and the daunting length of Ottoman supply lines, it marked the high point of Ottoman expansion in Europe. For the next 150 years, the Ottomans and Habsburgs would contest the fate of southeastern Europe in a grinding stalemate, neither side achieving a decisive breakthrough. Yet while Europe captured most attention, Suleiman's ambitions reached far beyond the Danube. In the east, he led repeated campaigns against Safavid Persia, capturing Baghdad and bringing Mesopotamia under firm Ottoman rule. Ottoman fleets, meanwhile, challenged Portuguese power in the Indian Ocean, while in the Mediterranean, the Sultan's navy, under the legendary admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa, dominated the seas. Barbarossa, known in Europe as Redbeard, rose from corsair origins to become the Grand Admiral of the Ottoman fleet, defeating Christian navies and extending Ottoman influence across North Africa. From their strongholds in Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, Ottoman squadrons not only controlled shipping lanes, but also struck at Christian coasts, spreading the reach of Ottoman maritime power. Diplomacy, too, flourished in Suleiman's reign. Breaking with old enmities, he forged an alliance with France against the Habsburgs. Ottoman fleets overwintered in French ports, and both empires coordinated their military strategies. Commercial agreements, known as capitulations, granted French merchants privileged access to Ottoman markets, establishing a pattern that other European states would soon follow. While these arrangements initially highlighted Ottoman strength and generosity, they would, in time, provide Europe with leverage to penetrate and exploit Ottoman markets. Suleiman's achievements were not limited to the battlefield or the council chamber. His Turkish subjects called him Kanuni, the lawgiver, while Europeans knew him as the Magnificent. His legal reforms balanced Islamic Sharia with secular codes, creating a comprehensive system that provided stability for the empire's vast and diverse population, a legacy that would endure for centuries. The administrative structure of the empire matured during his reign. At the center stood the imperial palace, where Suleiman presided over a formidable council, the Divan, comprised of the Grand Vizier, military leaders, and top financial and judicial officials. This sophisticated bureaucracy, staffed by men selected and trained through the palace school system, executed the Sultan's will throughout the empire. Crucially, most high officials came from the Devshirme, Christian youths recruited from the provinces and raised in the Ottoman service, ensuring that loyalty was owed to the Sultan alone, not to any hereditary nobility. This slave elite effectively prevented the rise of rival aristocracies. Meanwhile, the religious scholars, or ulama, led by the Sheikh-ul-Islam, enjoyed significant autonomy in judicial and educational matters, balancing secular authority and safeguarding Islamic tradition. Provincial government, too, reflected this careful web of checks and balances, blending centralized oversight with local expertise and religious authority. In every sphere, Suleiman's reign pushed the Ottoman state to new heights, militarily, legally, administratively, and culturally, setting a standard by which later generations would measure greatness. By the height of Suleiman, the Magnificent's reign, the Ottoman Empire had become a complex and finely balanced machine of governance, commerce, culture, and court intrigue. Power flowed from Istanbul, but it was carefully balanced in the provinces. Governors appointed by the imperial center administered key regions, yet they were checked by local judges and military commanders who answered directly to the Sultan. Through the Timar system, Ottoman cavalrymen received land rights in exchange for military service, creating a decentralized yet loyal force of warriors that extended imperial authority deep into the countryside. This arrangement provided a counterweight to the elite Janissary corps, ensuring that power was never too concentrated. Economically, the empire flourished at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ottoman lands included historic artisanal hubs that produced rich textiles, exquisite ceramics, intricate metalwork, and other luxury goods. State-run workshops in Istanbul crafted items of exceptional quality for the court, while urban guilds who regulated production, upheld quality standards, and prevented monopolistic competition. The state intervened in pricing to keep staples affordable, especially in cities like Istanbul and Cairo, where unrest could threaten imperial stability. Agriculture, however, remained the backbone of the economy. Most farmers were free peasants, not serfs, though they were tied to the land through taxation. Grain reserves were stored to prevent famine and stabilize food prices. Long-distance trade networks blossomed. Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Jews. Diverse merchant communities connected markets across continents, linking Istanbul to Venice, Cairo to Damascus, and beyond. This material prosperity nurtured an equally remarkable cultural flourishing. At its center stood Mimar Sinan, the empire's master architect. Born a Christian in Anatolia and recruited through the Devshirme system, Sinan converted to Islam and rose through the military engineering ranks. Over a 50-year career, he designed hundreds of mosques, palaces, bridges, and public buildings. His masterpieces, the Shahzada Mosque, the Grand Suleymaniye Complex, and the Selimiye Mosque built in his old age, merged Byzantine spatial concepts like the central dome with Islamic aesthetics and Ottoman innovations. The result was a uniquely Ottoman architectural language, simultaneously elegant, bold, and harmonious. Literature also reached new heights. Ottoman poetry, influenced by Persian forms, developed its own voice. The court funded historians, scientists, astronomers, and theologians who enriched the intellectual life of the empire. Into this glittering world stepped a woman whose influence would reshape the politics of the royal household. Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan. Captured in modern-day Ukraine and brought to the imperial harem, she captured Suleiman's heart and ultimately became his legal wife, a radical break from Ottoman tradition. She lived with the Sultan in the main palace, bore several children, and remained his most trusted confidant until her death in 1558. Roxolana's presence transformed palace politics. Previously, concubines were sent away after producing sons to avoid rivalries between mothers. But Roxolana remained at court, influencing policy, diplomacy, and appointments. She built charitable foundations, corresponded with European monarchs, and became a power in her own right. Some labeled her manipulative. Others saw in her a true political partner to the Sultan. But court intrigue soon turned deadly. Suleiman's eldest and most promising son, Mustafa, fell victim to suspicion, possibly fueled by Roxolana's desire to secure power for her own sons. In 1553, Mustafa was executed during a campaign in Persia, a decision that shocked contemporaries and, according to many, marked the beginning of imperial decline. After Roxolana's death, Suleiman was left emotionally broken. His remaining sons, Selim and Bayezid, turned on each other. Following Bayezid's defeat and execution, Selim, less capable than his brothers, was left as sole heir. And yet, even in his 70s, the aging sultan continued to lead campaigns. In 1566, he marched once again into Hungary to face the Habsburgs. A golden age was nearing its twilight. The cracks in the imperial armor had begun to show. During the climactic siege of Siget Var, as Ottoman guns thundered and victory drew near, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent passed away in his tent, ending one of history's most remarkable reigns. His Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, concealed the Sultan's death, quietly ensuring a seamless transition to Selim II before the news was revealed. As Suleiman's body returned to Istanbul for burial in the grand tomb he himself had designed, the Ottoman Empire stood at its golden zenith. The empire's borders stretched from the deserts of Algeria to the Persian Gulf, from the Black Sea's Crimean steppe to the mountains of Yemen. Its armies were unmatched in the Mediterranean world, its bureaucracy unrivaled for its sophistication, its cities gleaming centers of commerce, learning, and power. The system that Suleiman perfected, its laws, its institutions, its dazzling cultural achievements, seemed destined to endure forever. Yet even in this golden age, the seeds of future trouble had already taken root. The practice of royal fratricide, so brutally enforced in the execution of Prince Mustafa, would soon be replaced by a system of princely confinement, producing future sultans often untested and ill-prepared for rule. The once mighty Sipahi cavalry was rapidly losing its place to the firearm-wielding janissaries, signaling a shift in military technology that the empire was slow to match with new innovation. The immense wealth pouring into the imperial treasury began to distort the economy, fueling inflation and laying the groundwork for future fiscal strain. Still, none of these cracks were visible as Selim II took the throne. The empire stood as one of history's great superpowers, uniting a vast mosaic of peoples, languages, and faiths under a functioning imperial system that promised security, prosperity, and cultural achievement for millions. The legacy of this era, the mosques and palaces of Istanbul, the poetry, law codes, and art, would echo long after the empire's power declined, shaping the modern Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans in ways that remain visible today. How did the Ottomans govern such extraordinary diversity for centuries? The answer lies in a genius for pragmatic flexibility. Unlike many empires, the Ottomans rarely imposed a single system everywhere. Instead, they adapted their rule to local conditions while maintaining the core institutions of the imperial center. This flexibility allowed them to absorb new territories with minimal disruption, gradually extending central authority where it could be sustained. At the apex stood the Sultan, theoretically all-powerful, the guardian of Islam's holiest places, heir to the emperors of Byzantium, protector of vital trade routes, and the head of an unbroken dynastic line tracing back to Osman. Yet in practice, even his authority was bounded by Islamic law, tradition, and the limitations of pre-modern communication. Beneath the Sultan, a well-organized bureaucracy operated through specialized departments and the Imperial Council, or Divan. The Grand Vizier, chief among ministers, oversaw state affairs and often represented the Sultan. Other viziers, treasurers, chancellors, and military commanders formed the senior echelons of governance. Most of these high officials rose not through aristocratic birth, but through the remarkable devshirme system, a periodic levy of Christian boys from rural Balkans and Anatolia who were converted to Islam, rigorously educated in palace schools, and elevated by merit. This slave elite system, unique in its scale and ambition, created a cadre of top administrators and military leaders whose loyalty lay with the Sultan alone, preventing the rise of hereditary nobles who might challenge imperial authority, a fatal weakness in other Islamic empires. The military, too, was structured to balance and concentrate power, ensuring the continued stability of this vast and diverse state. The remarkable power and cohesion of the Ottoman Empire rested on an intricate and multi-layered system that balanced military strength, religious administration, and economic management. At the heart of the empire's military machine was the Janissary Corps, elite infantry recruited through the devshirme, or child levy, which drew Christian youth from the provinces and transformed them into the Sultan's most loyal and professional soldiers. Renowned for their discipline and skill with firearms, the Janissaries dominated the battlefield, and secured the Sultans' authority in major cities. To counterbalance their influence and extend control into the countryside, the Ottomans relied on a provincial cavalry class, sustained through the Timur land grant system, as well as a formidable arsenal of artillery, a growing navy, and a range of auxiliary forces. By the height of its power, the Ottoman military was the most effective fighting force in the Mediterranean world. Yet the empire's foundation was not solely military. Religious institutions formed a second, equally vital pillar. The ulama, scholars trained in Islamic law and theology, constituted a distinct hierarchy led by the powerful Sheikh-ul-Islam, whose authority to issue binding legal opinions sometimes even checked the sultan's own ambitions. Through vakufs, or charitable religious foundations, the empire administered mosques, schools, hospitals, and soup kitchens. These networks delivered crucial social services, often with considerable autonomy, and helped knit together the diverse regions of the empire by means of religious learning and charity. Perhaps most distinctive of all was the Ottoman approach to religious diversity, embodied in the millet system. Rather than enforcing rigid conformity, the state recognized major religious communities, Orthodox Christians, Armenians, Jews, and others, as self-governing entities for many purposes. Each millet, under its own religious leaders, managed matters such as marriage, divorce, and an inheritance according to its own laws. The Greek Orthodox millet, headed by the Patriarch of Constantinople, was the largest non-Muslim group, but other Christian denominations and Jews enjoyed similar privileges. Non-Muslims paid a special tax, the jizya, in exchange for protection and exemption from military service, while the supremacy of Islam was clearly maintained. The millet system granted remarkable religious freedom, especially when compared to the violence and intolerance that tore Europe apart during the same era. When Spain expelled its Jews in 1492, thousands found refuge in the Ottoman lands. Sultan Bayezid II, upon hearing of the Spanish monarch's policy, reportedly remarked that by expelling skilled Jews, King Ferdinand had impoverished his own country and enriched the Ottomans. This policy exemplified the empire's pragmatic and inclusive, though still hierarchical, approach. The Ottoman elite prided themselves on managing a complex multicultural realm. They described the empire as a garden of many flowers, each contributing to the whole while retaining its unique character. Economically, the Ottomans built a vast integrated market by linking regional production zones and securing crucial trade routes between Europe and Asia, particularly after the conquest of Egypt and Syria. Ottoman territories became hubs for textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and agricultural goods. State intervention focused on ensuring food supply for cities, maintaining export quality, and avoiding monopolies in essential trades. In urban centers, guilds played a crucial regulatory role, setting standards, controlling access to trades, providing social services, and acting as intermediaries between craftsmen and the state. These guilds included Muslims, Christians, and Jews working side by side, which allowed both cooperation and effective tax collection. At its base, the empire's prosperity depended on agriculture, with most people living as farmers. Peasant cultivators were protected by law and custom, with tax obligations that were stable and predictable. Large estates were rare, as imperial policy favored small-scale farming to boost tax efficiency and military recruitment. State granaries helped stabilize food prices, preventing unrest during shortages and ensuring urban calm. In sum, the Ottoman system's true genius lay in its ability to balance military might, religious diversity, economic integration, and social hierarchy, creating a durable order that shaped the empire's fortunes for centuries. In the height of the Ottoman Empire, urban life became a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of countless cultures, religions, and languages. Merchants, regardless of their backgrounds, forged commercial ties that reached from the bustling markets of Istanbul to distant ports across the Mediterranean and deep into Asia. Greeks and Armenians played leading roles in the empire's internal trade, while Turkish, Arab, and Persian merchants kept commercial channels open with other Muslim lands. Jewish communities, renowned for their international networks, often specialized in long-distance trade, linking the Ottoman world to their brethren in Europe and beyond. By the 16th century, the empire's cities had become cosmopolitan centers where the most coveted luxury goods flowed in from every corner of the known world: silks from China, spices from India, Venetian glass, Persian carpets, and much more. These thriving markets fueled a distinctive urban culture. Each Ottoman city was organized around a grand central complex, typically combining a mosque, marketplace, public bath, and schools. Neighborhoods often clustered along religious lines, each with its own churches, synagogues, or mosques. But commerce brought everyone together, creating a sense of shared urban identity. The Ottoman capital, Istanbul, stood as the finest example of this urban sophistication. After the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II rebuilt the city as a magnificent Islamic metropolis, yet preserved elements of its ancient Christian heritage. The names Istanbul and Constantinople coexisted for centuries, reflecting the city's layered past. Its skyline became famous for its soaring domes and slender minarets, which offered a striking contrast to the ancient Byzantine churches that still served the Christian population. At the city's heart stood the Topkapi Palace, perched on the historic Acropolis above the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara. This palace was both the residence of the Sultan and the administrative nerve center of the empire. By the late 1500s, Istanbul had grown into one of the world's largest and most cosmopolitan cities, its population surpassing 500,000. Walking through its markets, one could hear a dozen languages: Italian, Persian, Greek, Arabic, Slavic, Armenian. The city was a crossroads of peoples and cultures. Each community brought its own traditions, foods, and crafts, but all adapted to the rhythms of Ottoman urban life, creating a cultural mosaic unique to the empire. The material culture of the Ottoman city reflected this cosmopolitan spirit. Architecture combined Byzantine concepts of space with Islamic and Ottoman decorative innovations. Textiles were woven with motifs inspired by Persian, Chinese, Italian, and indigenous designs. The celebrated ceramics of Iznik showed Chinese artistic influence but were crafted with distinctly Ottoman techniques to rival European porcelain. Even Ottoman cuisine was a fusion, blending Central Asian, Persian, Arab, and Balkan flavors into something both distinctive and endlessly diverse. Intellectual life flourished as well. The Ottoman court attracted scholars, poets, historians, and scientists from every background. Literary culture thrived in Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. Many Ottoman elites moved easily between these languages. Turkish served as the language of government, Arabic as the tongue of religion and law, and Persian as the language of high culture and poetry. The golden age of Ottoman Turkish poetry produced masterpieces of subtlety and sophistication, especially under poets like Baki and Fuzuli, whose verses explored themes of love, power, beauty, and the fleeting nature of life. Sultan Suleiman himself, writing under the name Muhibi, was celebrated as a poet in his own right. Court historians blended factual reporting with literary artistry, casting Ottoman triumphs as signs of divine favor while drawing moral lessons from defeat. Encyclopedic works cataloged knowledge in geography, medicine, and botany, often incorporating new European discoveries alongside Islamic traditions. Religious life remained vital and diverse. Sufi mystical orders like the Mevlevi, known in the West as the whirling dervishes, and the Bektashi developed distinct spiritual practices and interpretations of Islam. At the same time, Orthodox Sunni scholars produced sophisticated legal and religious opinions to address the new challenges of a growing, diverse empire. All of these elements combined to give Ottoman urban life a richness and complexity unmatched in its era, a world where cultures met, ideas flowed, and the city itself became a living mosaic of empire. The Ottoman Empire fostered a vibrant and complex cultural world where mystical spirituality and strict legalism in Islam existed side by side, creating a religious environment both flexible and intellectually rigorous. This blend allowed the empire to embrace both the everyday religious devotion of the masses and the scholarly pursuits of jurists and theologians. In the realm of science and medicine, Ottomans built on the foundation of earlier Islamic golden ages, furthering astronomical knowledge with observatories that produced star catalogs and planetary tables remarkable for their precision. Ottoman medicine drew from Greek, Arabic, and local traditions, resulting in sophisticated surgical techniques, especially for eye diseases and bone injuries. Illustrated medical manuscripts reveal an advanced understanding of human anatomy and an eagerness to document new findings. In the visual arts, Islamic restrictions on figural representation in religious contexts led Ottoman artists to develop new forms of expression. Calligraphy, the highest art, reached extraordinary heights of elegance, with scribes perfecting intricate scripts for sacred and poetic texts. Architects and craftsmen decorated buildings and objects with highly refined geometric and floral patterns, from grand mosques to everyday textiles. Yet miniature painting flourished for secular purposes. Illustrated histories, scientific treatises, and literature depicted court life, battles, cityscapes, and natural wonders with vivid attention to detail. Music permeated Ottoman society at every level. Military bands inspired soldiers, Sufi musicians accompanied mystical ceremonies, and court orchestras entertained the elite. Popular festivities and celebrations featured a rich musical tradition grounded in complex modes, or makams, drawing on influences from Arab, Persian, Turkish, and Byzantine music. Instruments like the ney flute, tenbur lute, and kudum drums created a sound unique to Ottoman classical music, preserved and passed on by master musicians. Daily life for ordinary people was shaped by their social class, occupation, religious community, and region. Most Ottomans followed the cycles of agricultural seasons and religious calendars, and Muslims, Christians, and Jews each observed their own holidays and traditions. Still, public life often brought these groups together, especially in communal spaces such as public baths, hammams, markets, gardens, and most notably, coffee houses. Coffee, introduced from Yemen in the 16th century, quickly became a social phenomenon. In the cities, coffee houses served as meeting places where people exchanged news, discussed politics, enjoyed poetry and music, and sometimes debated ideas. Their importance was so great that authorities occasionally shut them down in times of unrest, fearing they might become centers of resistance or sedition. Home and family were at the heart of Ottoman society. Households often included extended relatives and, in the wealthier homes, servants or slaves. Marriage customs varied by community and region, but were typically patriarchal in structure. Women's experiences depended greatly on social status and geography. While elite women could wield real influence through family ties, property, or business, most women labored with men in fields or homes. Gender segregation in public was the norm, but women still maintained close social circles within their own spaces. Entertainment came in many forms: shadow puppetry, public storytellers who recited epic tales, and sporting events such as oil wrestling or archery, all providing amusement and opportunities for socializing. Religious festivals united neighborhoods and towns in colorful processions, feasts, and ceremonies. Sultans organized lavish public events for military victories, royal weddings, or circumcisions, distributing food and gifts to reinforce their legitimacy and popularity. Education in the empire followed multiple paths. Most children received basic religious education in local schools attached to mosques, churches, or synagogues. Advanced studies for Muslims centered on madrasas, which taught theology, law, literature, and logic. The palace school, meanwhile, trained a select elite for careers in government or the military. Though formal education was largely limited to boys, informal learning at home gave girls and women the skills and cultural knowledge needed in their daily lives. The Ottoman legal system balanced Islamic Sharia with imperial legislation. Muslim civil and criminal matters were judged by Qadi courts, while Christians and Jews could use their own religious courts or seek justice in Ottoman courts, depending on the issue and their preference. This flexible legal structure accommodated the empire's diversity and helped maintain social order across a vast and varied population. The secret to the Ottoman Empire's remarkable endurance lay in its sophisticated blend of religious and secular authority. The Sultan's power to issue qanun, secular administrative law, allowed the empire to respond flexibly to new challenges and situations not covered by religious jurisprudence. This dual system, at once flexible and legitimate, became a cornerstone of imperial governance. By the middle of the 16th century, the Ottoman world had matured into an intricate and cohesive civilization, spanning 3 continents and integrating an astonishing diversity of peoples. Its social and political structures could manage difference while sustaining unity. The achievements of Ottoman civilization in architecture, law, the arts, and administration reflected both a synthesis of inherited traditions and original contributions to world culture. For all its strengths, pragmatic flexibility, balance between central authority and local autonomy, the fusion of religious legitimacy with practical governance, and an openness to innovation, the system contained latent weaknesses as well. Delicate balances between rival power centers could easily tip into instability, especially in the hands of weak leaders. The ongoing compromise between high ideals and pragmatic necessity left tensions that could be exploited by purists, while the sheer scale of the empire made it difficult to maintain uniform control as new technologies and economic forces emerged. As the 16th century drew to a close, the Ottoman Empire appeared at the height of its power, a cosmopolitan civilization shaping life from the Balkans and North Africa to the Caucasus and Arabia. Yet even as it flourished, the seeds of transformation and challenge were beginning to sprout. After the death of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566, the empire reached its apogee. Its armies were nearly unrivaled, its borders vast, and its culture flourishing. However, beneath this surface, subtle but significant changes were already underway. Suleiman's son and successor, Selim II, was known more for his fondness for wine than for the arts of statecraft or war. Content to enjoy the pleasures of the palace, Selim largely entrusted imperial affairs to his brilliant Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha. This sultanic disengagement would become an increasingly common pattern in subsequent generations, as rulers relied more and more on capable ministers to manage affairs of state. Meanwhile, the traditional Ottoman system of succession, once marked by brutal fratricide to ensure only the strongest survived, began to shift. Under Selim II, princes were confined to the palace rather than sent to govern provinces, reducing civil strife, but also depriving future sultans of vital experience in administration and warfare. Many would enter power untested and ill-prepared. This shift coincided with a new era sometimes called the Sultanate of Women, as mothers, wives, and favored concubines, especially the Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, wielded enormous political power. Figures like Kosem Sultan and Turhan Sultan, often acting as regents for young or disinterested rulers, formed alliances with janissary commanders and top officials, sometimes providing capable leadership, but just as often generating intrigue and instability. As these internal dynamics evolved, the Ottoman military itself began to change, setting the stage for further transformations in the nature and fortunes of imperial power. As the 17th century unfolded, the once mighty Timur cavalry, long the backbone of Ottoman military expansion, became a relic in the age of gunpowder. Firearms and artillery now ruled the battlefield. The Janissary Corps, once a tightly disciplined force of slave soldiers entirely loyal to the Sultan, evolved into a hereditary military caste. Their recruitment increasingly drew from freeborn Muslim families rather than the traditional Devshirme levy, changing the nature and loyalties of the Corps. Where the Ottomans had once led the world in artillery and fortress construction, they now fell behind the rapidly modernizing armies and navies of Europe. Ottoman firearms and tactics stagnated, while European innovations left the once dominant Ottoman navy outmatched and organizationally stagnant. These weaknesses became glaringly obvious through a series of costly wars. The protracted struggle with the Habsburgs in the Long Turkish War ended only in stalemate, and a disastrous war with Persia led to significant territorial losses. Most symbolically, the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571, although not strategically decisive, dealt a devastating psychological blow to Ottoman prestige, proving that Christian fleets could defeat the Sultan's once invincible navy. Economic problems emerged alongside military ones. The so-called price revolution of the 16th century, driven by silver from the Americas, triggered severe inflation across Ottoman lands. Traditional price controls faltered, and the discovery of maritime trade routes around Africa gradually redirected Asian commerce away from Ottoman-controlled overland routes, though the decline was more gradual than historians once thought. Meanwhile, the Timar system of land grants to cavalry soldiers gave way to tax farming, the right to collect taxes auctioned off to the highest bidder. While this increased immediate revenue for the treasury, It encouraged a short-term exploitation of peasants and widespread corruption. Officials, once promoted on merit through the devshirme, increasingly bought their posts. The practice of giving gifts for appointments became standard throughout the bureaucracy. At times, even the post of Grand Vizier went to the highest bidder rather than the most capable statesman. These internal vulnerabilities were compounded by external threats. The Habsburg and Russian empires grew ever stronger through military modernization and territorial expansion. Persia remained a potent adversary to the east. European merchants, shielded by capitulation treaties, gained privileged access to Ottoman markets, often to the detriment of local producers. Yet, despite these mounting crises, the Ottoman state proved remarkably resilient. Periods of turmoil alternated with intervals of genuine revival and reform, especially under the capable stewardship of the Köprülü family of Grand Viziers in the later 17th century. Under Köprülü Mehmed Pasha and his son, Köprülü Fazıl Ahmed, imperial administration was revitalized and Ottoman forces conquered Crete after a long struggle with Venice. In fact, the empire's territorial reach continued to expand along some frontiers, particularly in Ukraine and Poland-Lithuania, thanks to vassals like the Crimean Khanate, extending Ottoman influence to the shores of the northern Black Sea. But the Great Gamble of 1683, an enormous Ottoman expedition to capture Vienna, proved to be a turning point. After initially threatening the Habsburg capital, the Ottoman army was repulsed by a broad European coalition. The Holy League's counteroffensive drove the Ottomans back, and the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 forced the empire to surrender major territories for the first time in its history, signaling a new and more uncertain era for Ottoman power. The closing centuries of Ottoman power were marked not only by dramatic military defeats, but by profound attempts at reform, innovation, and resilience in the face of adversity. The loss of Hungary, Transylvania, territories in Greece, and the advance of Russian and Polish forces into Ukraine and the Black Sea shocked the Ottoman elite into acknowledging that traditional methods could no longer ensure the empire's survival. In the early 18th century, a new spirit of experimentation took hold during the Tulip era under Sultan Ahmed III and Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. For the first time, the Ottomans established a printing press in Turkish, set up military training programs inspired by Europe, and sent ambassadors to study Western institutions firsthand. These initial reforms sparked both excitement and fear. Conservative voices, particularly among religious scholars and the Janissary corps, whose privileges seemed threatened, often succeeded in reversing these changes. The Janissary Rebellion of 1730 overthrew Ahmed III and ended the first reform wave, setting a precedent. Each step toward modernization would be met by fierce backlash, creating a cycle of hope and disappointment that characterized the century. The empire's external challenges only mounted. Russia, under Catherine the Great, expanded relentlessly, pressing on Ottoman territory around the Black Sea. The disastrous Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774 ended with the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, which gave Russia territorial gains, the right to Black Sea passage, and, perhaps most ominously, the right to protect Orthodox Christians within the empire, a clause that would be invoked again and again to justify intervention. At the same time, new currents of nationalism, sparked by the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, spread through the Balkans. Greek, Serbian, and Bulgarian revival movements, now inspired by ideas of popular sovereignty and nationhood, began to challenge Ottoman legitimacy, which was rooted in dynastic and religious authority. Sultan Selim III, recognizing the mounting crisis, attempted the boldest reforms yet with his new order. His vision included a European-style army, administrative overhaul, and sweeping changes to the tax system. But entrenched interests, janissaries, religious leaders, and conservative officials saw these changes as threats to tradition and their own power. In 1807, a janissary revolt deposed Selim III, nearly ending the reform movement. Meanwhile, real power was shifting outside the imperial center. Warlords in Egypt, Greece, and Palestine exploited weakness to carve out semi-independent states. In Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha, an Albanian officer who seized power after Napoleon's invasion, built a modern army, navy, and economy, sometimes threatening Istanbul itself. Elsewhere, leaders like Ali Pasha of Janina and Ahmad al-Jazar asserted regional control, further undermining the central state. The empire's woes continued to mount. The Greek War of Independence, with European backing, erupted in 1821. Russian forces advanced again and again, drawing ever closer to Istanbul. In 1829, Muhammad Ali's Egyptian army occupied Syria and threatened the Anatolian heartland. By the 1830s, diplomats across Europe spoke openly of the Ottomans as the sick man of Europe, speculating on how to divide its territories after the seemingly inevitable collapse. Yet, remarkably, the empire did not collapse. Through a combination of continued reform, skillful diplomacy that played European rivals against each other, and the perseverance of its remaining provinces, the Ottoman state would survive for another century. The era from the late 16th to early 19th century was less a story of simple decline and more a tale of crisis, transformation, and a long, complex struggle to adapt to a rapidly changing world. As the Ottoman Empire entered the modern era, it found itself grappling with forces that would have tested the resilience of any state in history. Gone were the days of unchallenged military supremacy. The Ottomans were no longer an expanding empire, but a vast and diverse polity fighting to hold its ground. This transformation was anything but smooth. Military defeats cost the empire critical territories, and waves of Muslim refugees streamed in from regions lost to advancing Christian powers. The economic toll was heavy, living standards fell in many provinces, and political instability eroded the authority of the central government. Yet, in the face of these cascading crises, the Ottoman system showed a surprising tenacity. The core institutions that had underpinned centuries of imperial rule, like the millet system, which allowed religious communities a measure of autonomy, and the cultural norms forged in the empire's golden age, did not collapse. Instead, they adapted to the new realities, sometimes bending but rarely breaking. The old story of Ottoman decline, often told as a tale of inevitable decay, misses this deeper complexity. The empire's true struggle was to meet the unprecedented challenges of a rapidly changing world. Europe's military revolution, global shifts in trade, the rise of nationalist movements, and the coming wave of industrialization. That the Ottoman Empire managed to survive these storms, while many of its contemporaries faded away, is a testament to the foundational structures put in place during its formative centuries. By the start of the 19th century, the empire faced an uncertain future. The methods that had served it for generations were no longer enough. Its armies, once the scourge of Europe, now suffered repeated defeats. The empire's borders shrank, pressed by aggressive European powers and nationalist uprisings. Its economy floundered, unable to compete with foreign goods and beset by internal weakness. Yet the Ottomans refused to fade quietly into history. Instead, they embarked on one of the most ambitious reform movements in their long history, determined to reinvent themselves as a modern state. The process gained momentum when Sultan Mahmud II rose to power in 1808. His reign began amid crisis, rebellion in Serbia and Greece, the growing autonomy of Muhammad Ali in Egypt, Russian advances along the Black Sea, and within, powerful provincial notables called ayans who wielded near-independent authority. The Janissary Corps, once the empire's most feared soldiers, now resisted every effort at reform. Mahmud II understood that change could not be rushed. First, he reached an accommodation with the ayans, formally acknowledging their power while quietly reasserting the Sultan's supremacy. Then, he began to assemble a small but loyal corps of soldiers trained in the latest European techniques, laying the groundwork for confrontation with the Janissaries. The showdown came in the summer of 1826, in an event known as the Auspicious Incident. When the Janissaries rose in revolt, Mahmud was ready. He secured the support of religious leaders and the public, then unleashed loyal artillery units against the Janissary barracks. The aftermath was brutal. Thousands died, and the corps was abolished for good, removing the single greatest obstacle to modernization. With the Janissaries gone, Mahmud accelerated reform. He created a new army modeled on those of Europe, complete with modern weapons, uniforms, and training. He overhauled the central bureaucracy, replacing the old system with specialized ministries. Tax collection was reformed, corruption targeted, and direct imperial control over the provinces strengthened. Even the Sultan's appearance became a symbol of change, as Mahmud adopted Western clothing and trimmed his beard in European style. Despite these bold efforts, the challenges facing the empire were formidable, and many of Mahmud's reforms had limited immediate effect. Foreign invasions, internal unrest, and economic hardship continued to test the limits of Ottoman endurance. Still, these early reforms laid the critical groundwork for the far-reaching transformations that would follow, marking the Ottoman Empire's first determined steps toward the modern world. The 19th century brought the Ottoman Empire face-to-face with challenges that threatened its very survival. The Greek War of Independence, bolstered by the sympathy and support of several major European powers, resulted in the irreversible loss of southern Greece. Soon after, the empire suffered another heavy blow at the hands of Russia in the War of 1828 to 1829, which forced the Ottomans to cede more territory and granted Russia a dangerous new influence in imperial affairs. Perhaps most alarming was the rebellion led by Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, whose well-trained, modernized army seized Syria and even threatened to invade Anatolia, the Ottoman heartland. Facing this existential threat, Sultan Mahmud II was compelled to seek Russian protection, agreeing to the humiliating Treaty of Hunkar-Iskelesi in 1833, a stark demonstration of the empire's vulnerability. Despite these crises, the drive for reform did not die with Mahmud. His successor, Abdülmecid I, pressed on with a sweeping program of modernization, remembered today as the Tanzimat, or reorganization. This new era was inaugurated in 1839 with the Noble Edict of the Rose Chamber, which launched a series of unprecedented reforms aimed at transforming the Ottoman state and society. The Tanzimat reforms established legal equality for all subjects regardless of religion, promised security of life and property, abolished the old tax farming system, introduced compulsory military service, and set up new secular courts to exist alongside the traditional religious judiciary. While these reforms were only unevenly implemented, they marked a radical new understanding of the relationship between government and governed, one that was revolutionary for the empire's time. At the heart of these reforms were exceptional Ottoman statesmen, including Mustafa Rashid Pasha, Ali Pasha, and Fuad Pasha. Experienced diplomats, they had served in Europe and grasped both the strengths of Western models and the unique needs of the Ottoman world. Their vision was not to copy Europe blindly, but to carefully adapt select Western practices that would strengthen and preserve the Ottoman state's independence. Education became a central concern. Alongside the traditional religious schools, new secular institutions taught the sciences, European languages, and administrative skills. The School of Civil Administration prepared bureaucrats. Medical and engineering schools produced the technical specialists needed for a modern state. Eventually, the Darul Funun, a Western-style university, was established, creating a new elite versed in both Islamic and European intellectual traditions. Legal reform proceeded apace. Commercial and criminal codes based on European examples were introduced, and new mixed courts handled disputes involving foreigners. The pinnacle of legal change came in 1876 with the Mesele, a civil code that blended Islamic jurisprudence with modern legal concepts. Meanwhile, the empire's infrastructure was transformed. Telegraph lines allowed the government to communicate rapidly with remote provinces. Railways and steamship lines began to knit together distant corners of the empire, though their reach remained modest by European standards. The founding of the first Ottoman newspaper and a burgeoning press, even under censorship, fostered a new public sphere where political and cultural debate could flourish. Diplomatically, the Tanzimat period marked a significant shift. During the Crimean War in the 1850s, Britain and France allied with the Ottomans to check Russian expansion, resulting in the Treaty of Paris. This treaty not only confirmed the territorial integrity of the Ottoman state, but also recognized it as a legitimate member of the European state system. Another edict in 1856 reaffirmed the principles of equality and further extended civil rights to all subjects, regardless of faith. Yet not all welcomed these sweeping changes. Many religious leaders and conservative elements regarded the reforms with deep suspicion, fearing the loss of Islamic identity and an erosion of religious law. Some Muslim Ottomans resented the advantages the reforms brought to non-Muslim minorities, who often prospered through connections with European commerce. In the provinces, reforms sometimes translated not into opportunity, but into heavier taxes and new burdens of military service. Economically, the empire became ever more entangled with Europe, supplying raw materials and serving as a captive market for manufactured imports. Thus, while the Tanzimat era witnessed bold attempts at renewal, it also sowed new divisions and exposed fresh vulnerabilities in the fabric of Ottoman society, a pattern that would define the empire's final century. By the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire found itself in an ever-deepening web of financial dependency and political crisis. Commercial treaties stretching back to the 1500s had long granted European merchants exceptional privileges, preventing the empire from protecting its own industries with tariffs. As the 19th century wore on, the Ottomans increasingly relied on foreign loans to fund modernization projects and cover budget shortfalls. With each loan, financial independence slipped further away. In 1875, the government's inability to service its towering debt forced it to declare partial bankruptcy. 6 years later, European powers stepped in, establishing the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a body run by foreign creditors who took direct control over significant state revenues. While this move stabilized Ottoman finances, it also meant a dramatic loss of economic sovereignty. At the same time, new intellectual currents were stirring among Ottoman elites. The Young Ottomans, a group of writers and activists such as Namık Kemal, Ibrahim Shinasi, and Ziya Pasha, championed constitutional government and political freedoms. They used newspapers and literature to spread ideas of patriotism, liberty, and constitutional rule, arguing that Islamic principles could be reconciled with modern government. Their efforts helped spark a brief triumph for reform. In 1876, amid crisis in the Balkans and growing pressure from reformers, the new Sultan Abdul Hamid II announced the empire's first constitution. A parliament was established, drawing representatives from all corners of the Ottoman world. But the experiment was short-lived. Using the outbreak of war with Russia as his pretext, Abdul Hamid suspended the constitution after just 2 parliamentary sessions and embarked on a 3-decade period of personal rule. The Russo-Turkish War brought further disaster. Russian troops advanced to the gates of Istanbul, and the resulting Treaty of San Stefano imposed harsh terms, carving out a large Bulgarian state under Russian influence and recognizing the independence of Serbia, Romania, and Montenegro. Although the later Congress of Berlin softened some provisions, the empire still surrendered extensive territories in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and eastern Anatolia. These losses unleashed a torrent of refugees, hundreds of thousands of Muslims who fled newly independent or Russian-controlled lands, seeking safety in what remained of the empire. This influx created a humanitarian crisis and transformed the demographic landscape, making the Ottoman heartlands more Muslim than ever before. For 33 years, from 1876 to 1909, Sultan Abdülhamid II steered the empire through these storms with a unique mix of centralization, modernization, Islamic identity, and repression. He continued building railways, expanding telegraph networks, and reforming education to train a new generation of Ottoman officials and officers. He leveraged modern technologies, using photography and the telegraph to project imperial power and maintain control. Abdülhamid also put new emphasis on his role as caliph, positioning himself as leader of Sunni Muslims worldwide. This pan-Islamic policy was meant to rally loyalty among Muslim subjects, project Ottoman influence far beyond its shrinking borders, and counteract European encroachment. The Sultan cultivated connections with Muslims in British India, Russian Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, worrying colonial authorities who feared pan-Islamic agitation. But this period of innovation came hand in hand with growing repression. Censorship grew ever tighter, political opponents were exiled or silenced, and a sprawling intelligence network worked to root out dissent. Many liberal thinkers fled abroad, smuggling their publications back into the empire in defiance of official bans. The struggle for the soul and future of the Ottoman Empire had entered its final turbulent phase. In the turbulent final decades of the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful and far-reaching opposition force to emerge was the Committee of Union and Progress, better known as the Young Turks. Originating in the empire's medical and military academies, this dynamic movement brought together a remarkable coalition of Turks, Arabs, Albanians, Circassians, and others united in their opposition to Sultan Abdul Hamid II's autocratic rule and their commitment to restoring constitutional government. Through a network of secret cells and exiled activists, The Young Turks gradually extended their influence into the officer corps and across the empire, laying the groundwork for revolutionary change. Meanwhile, the empire itself was being transformed by demographic and economic forces. Cities like Istanbul, Izmir, Beirut, and Salonika swelled with migrants and refugees from lost territories, fueling urban growth and the spread of modern infrastructure. Tramways, gaslighting, and Western-style buildings became part of the cityscape. A rising middle class embraced European fashions and lifestyles, but retained distinctively Ottoman identities. At the same time, the loss of territory and mass migrations reshaped the empire's religious and ethnic composition. Muslims became the clear majority, but significant Christian and Jewish populations persisted, especially in major cities. These demographic changes fed intense debates over the future of Ottoman identity. Despite government censorship, intellectual life flourished. Literature adopted European styles while tackling uniquely Ottoman concerns. Newspapers navigated censors through coded language and historical allegory. Scientific works blended new concepts with Islamic traditions. Female authors, such as Fatma Aliyeh, gave voice to social and gender issues from an Islamic perspective. By the dawn of the 20th century, the empire's educated elite were fiercely debating its future. Some promoted Ottomanism, a civic identity embracing all citizens. Others advocated Islamism, highlighting religious unity as the empire's core. Turkish nationalism was still nascent but growing, emphasizing Turkish language and culture. Western-oriented liberalism and socialism also attracted supporters, particularly in urban and industrial centers. These competing visions all found expression in mounting opposition to Abdul Hamid's regime. In the summer of 1908, the simmering tensions erupted. Army units led by young Turk officers in Macedonia revolted, forcing Abdul Hamid II to restore the 1876 constitution and permit parliamentary elections. The news triggered widespread jubilation. Muslims, Christians, and Jews took to the streets together, celebrating a renewed sense of Ottoman unity and constitutional patriotism. But the new era soon revealed deep divisions. Counter-revolutionary forces tried to reverse the gains the following spring, but were ultimately defeated by constitutionalist troops. Abdul Hamid was deposed, replaced by his brother Mehmed Fem as a constitutional monarch. The Committee of Union and Progress evolved from a revolutionary movement into a political party, gradually consolidating power with increasingly authoritarian methods. External shocks further destabilized the empire. Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, Italy conquered Ottoman Libya, and the Balkan Wars swept away almost all remaining Ottoman territory in Europe, reducing the empire to a small enclave around Istanbul. These humiliations damaged the government's credibility and fueled the rise of hardline Turkish nationalism under CUP leaders Enver, Talat, and Kemal Pasha. The original multi-ethnic and multi-confessional vision of the Young Turks faded as the movement centralized power and prioritized Turkish identity, alienating Arab, Albanian, and other minority elites who had once backed the revolution. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire had been irreversibly transformed, buffeted by both internal and external crises and entering its final, tumultuous chapter. As the Ottoman Empire approached the dawn of the 20th century, its world had changed beyond recognition. The vast, diverse realm of earlier centuries had contracted dramatically. Most of the Balkans, North Africa, and parts of the Caucasus were lost, and the population had grown more homogeneous, increasingly Muslim, and concentrated in Anatolia and the Arab provinces. The Ottoman state had undergone remarkable modernization, new bureaucratic institutions, improved communication networks, broader access to education, and reformed legal systems gave the empire a sense of renewed purpose. Yet fundamental uncertainties remained. Could this battered state hold on to its remaining territories as European imperial powers and nationalist movements pressed ever closer? Would its experiment with constitutional government endure? Or would the old pull toward authoritarianism win out? Could Ottoman identity serve as a true unifying force? Or would ethnic and religious divisions prove too strong? And above all, how could the empire position itself in a Europe spiraling toward war? In the summer of 1914, the Ottoman Empire, often derided as the sick man of Europe, stood at a critical crossroads. Decades of adaptation and reform had ensured its survival, but the greatest test was yet to come. The choices made in those tense months would not only determine the empire's fate, but help shape the future of the entire Middle East. In July 1914, as Europe edged toward catastrophe, two German warships, the Goeben and Breslau, arrived in Istanbul's waters, pursued by British naval forces. The Ottoman decision to admit these ships, renaming them Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midilli, and presenting them as Ottoman vessels with their German crews sporting fezes, symbolized a dramatic shift. Though official neutrality was still claimed, the empire was drifting toward the Central Powers. This was not an easy or automatic choice. Only a year earlier, the empire had emerged from the Balkan Wars battered, its remaining European territories nearly gone, and a humanitarian crisis unfolding as Muslims fled advancing Christian armies. The economy and morale were both in tatters, and the state's first instinct was to remain neutral, buying time to recover. Ottoman diplomacy had long been built on playing the great European powers against each other, never fully aligning with one bloc. But the geopolitical winds were shifting. Russia's age-old ambition to seize the Turkish Straits loomed over every decision. Britain had taken Egypt, and France eyed Syria. Just before the war, Britain had seized two Ottoman battleships, paid for by public subscription, that had become symbols of national pride. This left a sense of betrayal and deepened anti-British sentiment. Germany, in contrast, had carefully cultivated Ottoman friendship. Investment, military advisors, the construction of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, and the personal attentions of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who presented himself as a friend of Islam, all contributed to this growing partnership. German military officers such as General Lyman von Sanders played a leading role in Ottoman army modernization. Yet at the heart of this decisive turn was Enver Pasha, the energetic German-trained minister of war. Convinced of German victory and determined to restore lost Ottoman glory, Enver saw alliance with Berlin as the best hope for the empire's survival and the recovery of its lost lands. On August 2, 1914, a secret alliance was signed with Germany, kept hidden even from many top officials. The final break with neutrality came in late October 1914, when Ottoman warships, including the former Goeben under German command, bombarded Russian Black Sea ports. In that moment, the Ottoman Empire committed itself to the conflagration that would become the First World War. The decisions taken in these crucial weeks sealed not only the fate of a centuries-old empire, but would unleash a chain of events still echoing in the politics of the modern Middle East today. The First World War brought the Ottoman Empire to the brink of destruction, engulfing it in the most devastating conflict in its centuries-long history. The war's outbreak in November 1914 saw the Ottomans align with Germany against a coalition that included Russia, Britain, and France. Sultan Mehmed V declared jihad against the Entente powers, hoping to rally Muslim support both inside and outside the empire. But the call stirred little real response. The war's opening months set the tone for disaster. On the Caucasus front, Enver Pasha launched a bold winter campaign against Russian forces, aiming not only to reclaim lost territories, but to inspire a Muslim uprising in Central Asia. The result was calamity at the Battle of Sarikamish during the winter of 1914-1915. Of some 90,000 Ottoman troops who marched into the mountains, fewer than 15,000 survived. Most perished from cold and exhaustion before ever facing the enemy. The catastrophic defeat opened eastern Anatolia to Russian advances and deepened the Ottoman government's fears of internal dissent. Some Armenian communities in the region, hoping to secure independence, aided the Russians. But these actions, alongside long-standing suspicions, led the Ottoman authorities to order the mass deportation of Armenians from the war zone. What began as forced relocation soon became a campaign of killings, death marches, and starvation, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands. Though the Ottoman state claimed military necessity, evidence points to centrally organized violence on a massive scale. The tragedy of the Armenians remains one of the most bitterly debated episodes in Ottoman and world history, with many historians and governments recognizing it as genocide, while others continue to dispute the classification. Individual Turkish and Kurdish officials, and many ordinary Muslims, tried to shelter Armenian neighbors, but their efforts could not stem the tide of destruction. Meanwhile, another drama unfolded at the Dardanelles. Seeking to knock the Ottomans out of the war and reopen supply lines to Russia, Britain and France launched a daring naval assault on the Straits in March 1915. Ottoman mines and artillery repelled the attack, forcing the Allies to attempt an amphibious landing on the Gallipoli Peninsula. What was planned as a rapid victory turned into a 9-month bloodbath. Ottoman troops, under the command of the resourceful Mustafa Kemal, held their ground against repeated assaults by British, French, Australian, and New Zealand troops. The campaign failed, costing the Allies over 250,000 casualties before they withdrew in early 1916. Ottoman losses were even greater, but Gallipoli became a symbol of heroic defense and made Mustafa Kemal a national hero. On other fronts, the Ottomans fared little better. In Egypt, an attack on the Suez Canal failed, though it forced the British to keep thousands of troops tied down in the region. A second, larger Ottoman push in 1916 also failed, after which British armies began their advance into Ottoman-controlled Palestine. In Mesopotamia, British forces struck from Basra, and after initial setbacks, captured Baghdad in March 1917. Yet in 1916, Ottoman troops scored a notable success at Kout, compelling the surrender of an entire British force after a grueling 5-month siege. Despite occasional victories, the broader pattern was one of steady Ottoman retreat and mounting human suffering. The empire's armies were stretched thin across vast and hostile terrain, while civilian populations endured shortages, displacement, and violence on an unprecedented scale. The First World War would ultimately prove fatal to the Ottoman order, reshaping the map of the Middle East and setting the stage for a new and turbulent era. The closing years of World War I brought both fleeting triumph and terminal crisis for the Ottoman Empire. Victories such as Gallipoli proved that Ottoman soldiers were still capable of fierce resistance, but the empire as a whole was crumbling. Perhaps the most fateful event for its future was the Arab Revolt, launched in 1916 by Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca. Motivated by a mix of Arab nationalist aspirations and British promises of independence, Hussein's revolt, though limited in military impact, had enormous symbolic significance. Supported by British officers like Lawrence of Arabia and inspired by Arab nationalist thinkers, the revolt proposed a new vision for the post-Ottoman Middle East, one rooted in Arab identity, not Ottoman unity. This uprising revealed the deepening tensions between the Turkish nationalist Young Turk regime and Arab elites, many of whom had previously supported the Ottoman order, but now felt alienated by centralizing policies and the spread of Turkish linguistic nationalism. British and French support for Arab ambitions, though ultimately self-serving, found fertile ground amid this growing frustration. Meanwhile, secret international agreements were quietly redrawing the map of the Middle East. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, negotiated by Britain and France, envisioned the division of Ottoman Arab lands into spheres of influence. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 went further, promising a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. These plans, revealed by the Bolsheviks after the Russian Revolution, exposed the Allies' real intentions and sharply contradicted their promises to Arab leaders, causing alarm in Istanbul. By late 1917, the Ottoman Empire was on its last legs. Years of brutal warfare had claimed nearly 1 million soldiers, while at home, requisitions and scarcity caused widespread hunger, disease, and skyrocketing inflation. German influence over Ottoman affairs grew as the empire leaned ever more heavily on its ally. Despite these hardships, Ottoman armies continued to fight hard on many fronts. In Palestine, they slowed the British advance until the devastating defeat at Megiddo in 1918. In Mesopotamia and the Caucasus, they conducted desperate campaigns, sometimes regaining ground only to lose it again under Allied pressure. The situation at home, however, was hopeless. By October 1918, with Germany facing defeat and British troops advancing through Syria, the Ottoman government sought peace. The cabinet resigned, and on October 30th, Ottoman delegates signed the Armistice of Mudros aboard a British warship. The terms were harsh and open-ended, allowing Allied forces to occupy strategic points throughout the empire. Soon, British, French, Italian, and Greek troops landed across Anatolia and the Arab provinces. Istanbul itself fell under Allied occupation, with foreign warships anchored in the Bosphorus and soldiers patrolling its streets. Though the Sultan and his officials remained in office, their authority was little more than a shadow under foreign supervision. The post-war settlement, formalized in the Treaty of Sèvres in August 1920, dismantled what remained of the Ottoman realm. The empire's Arab provinces were handed over to Britain and France's mandates. Eastern Thrace and Izmir were given to Greece, the Turkish Straits were internationalized, and an independent Armenian state was planned for eastern Anatolia, with autonomy promised to the Kurds. Even what remained of Turkish finances was placed under international control. For the once mighty empire, it was a bitter and humiliating end. In the aftermath of World War I, plans for a severely reduced Turkish state emerged, one that would be limited to central Anatolia and effectively placed under European protection. While the Sultan's government in occupied Istanbul reluctantly accepted the dictates of the victorious allies, a new resistance was rising in the Anatolian interior. Its leader, Mustafa Kemal, the celebrated hero of Gallipoli, had been sent by the Sultan's administration to restore order in Anatolia. Instead, he became the driving force behind a nationalist movement committed to Turkish independence. Landing at Samsun on May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal quickly connected with other nationalist officers and local leaders, organizing a series of congresses that set out a vision of territorial integrity and full national sovereignty. When the Ottoman Parliament, under Allied pressure, was dissolved in early 1920, Kemal responded by establishing the Grand National Assembly in Ankara on April 23, 1920. For the first time, two rival governments claimed legitimacy, one in occupied Istanbul, the other in the free interior. The Allies sanctioned Greek landing at Izmir in May 1919, marked by violence against Turkish civilians, galvanized support for the nationalist cause. As Greek armies pushed deeper into Anatolia, the legitimacy of the Sultan's government eroded, while Kemal's movement gained broad support from across the country. The ensuing Turkish War of Independence was a complex struggle. Nationalists fought not only the Greeks, but also Armenian and French forces, while at the same time working diplomatically to split the Allied powers and gain crucial backing from Soviet Russia. The Ankara government's military successes against the Armenians in the east and the French in the south, combined with war fatigue among the British and French, shifted the diplomatic landscape. The decisive turning point came during the Greco-Turkish War, lasting from 1919 to 1922. Following early Greek advances that threatened Ankara, Kemal's forces launched a sweeping counteroffensive in August 1922. Within weeks, Turkish troops had recaptured Izmir and forced the Greek army out of Anatolia, ending the immediate threat to Turkish independence. A separate crisis with Britain over control of the Turkish Straits was averted by the Mudanya Armistice in October 1922. These nationalist victories rendered the Treaty of Sèvres obsolete. The Allies called for a new settlement, inviting both the Istanbul and Ankara governments to negotiations in Lausanne. Before talks began, the Turkish Grand National Assembly took a historic step. On November 1, 1922, it formally abolished the Ottoman Sultanate, separating the institution of Sultan from that of Caliph. Sultan Mehmed VI, the last Ottoman ruler, departed Istanbul aboard a British warship on November 17, 1922, bringing to a close a dynasty that had lasted over 6 centuries. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed on July 24, 1923, after months of hard bargaining, recognized the new Republic of Turkey as an independent state, within borders largely matching those of today. The Treaty of Sèvres was discarded. There would be no independent Armenia or Kurdistan. Greek territorial claims were abandoned. In exchange, Turkey gave up its claims to the former Ottoman lands in the Middle East and agreed to a population exchange with Greece, radically altering the demographics of both countries. With the Sultanate abolished and a new treaty in hand, Mustafa Kemal and his allies formalized their achievements. On October 29, 1923, the Turkish Grand National Assembly proclaimed the Republic of Turkey, with Ankara as its capital and Mustafa Kemal as its first president. The Caliphate, retained for a brief period as a purely religious office, was itself abolished in March 1924, severing the last institutional link to the Ottoman past. So ended more than 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. An empire that had once dominated 3 continents, shaped world history, and ruled the eastern Mediterranean, now gave way to a modern nation-state in Anatolia and a small foothold in Europe. From the ashes of the Ottoman Empire's catastrophic collapse, a new Turkish identity and state would arise, one whose resilience and adaptability would shape the decades to come. The end of 6 centuries of Ottoman rule was the result of overwhelming external pressures: European imperial expansion, World War, and the advance of nationalist movements among both Turks and the empire's many other peoples. Yet, it was also due to internal contradictions, economic underdevelopment, divisions over identity, and the inability of reforms to fully modernize the state. Even so, the Ottoman legacy proved impossible to erase. As the Ottoman sultans were exiled, their territories carved up, and their institutions dismantled, the empire's influence continued to reverberate across the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans. Borders, languages, music, cuisine, architecture, and religious practices all bore the unmistakable imprint of 6 centuries of Ottoman rule, a cultural inheritance that would shape successor states for generations. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Turkey itself. In 1923, the Turkish Republic was born, led by Mustafa Kemal, soon honored with the name Ataturk, Father of the Turks. Having led the national resistance to victory, Ataturk launched a sweeping revolution to transform the Ottoman heartland into a modern, secular nation-state. The scope of his reforms was breathtaking. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, ending Ottoman claims to religious leadership in the Muslim world. Religious schools were closed. Education was placed under direct state control. The old Ottoman legal codes were swept away, replaced by a civil code based on the Swiss model that, among other things, granted women equal rights in marriage and inheritance. Ataturk's Turkey adopted new national symbols and even new dress. The fez, once the mark of Ottoman modernity, was banned, and European styles became the norm. Most dramatically, in 1928, the Arabic script was replaced with a Latin-based alphabet, severing a centuries-old cultural link to the Ottoman era. These bold changes were designed to foster a distinctly Turkish national identity, sharply separated from the empire's Islamic imperial past. The state promoted a new historical narrative, one that celebrated pre-Islamic Turkish heritage and treated the Ottoman period as an obstacle to national development. Official history cast the Turkish War of Independence as a radical break, not a continuation of what had come before. Yet beneath this revolutionary rhetoric, continuities remained powerful. The Republic's army, bureaucracy, educational system, and parliament all had roots in the late Ottoman era, evolving directly from institutions and constitutional experiments that had begun under the empire. Even the style of reform, top-down, state-driven modernization, continued the approach of earlier Ottoman rulers from Selim III to the Young Turks. The very human capital of the new republic, its leaders, professionals, and much of its middle class, were themselves products of Ottoman education and late imperial society. In everyday life, too, Ottoman cultural patterns endured, shaping language, customs, and social life regardless of state ideology. The new Turkey's relationship with its Ottoman past would remain deeply ambivalent. During the early years of strict Kemalist rule, official discourse downplayed or dismissed Ottoman achievements, seeing them as relics of a backward religious order. But by the 1980s, as Turkey liberalized and opened up politically and economically, a more nuanced and balanced view began to emerge. Conservative and Islamist groups started to invoke Ottoman heritage as an alternative to the strict, Western-oriented ideals of Kemalism, sparking new debates about identity, history, and the direction of the nation. In this way, the Ottoman legacy continued not only as a set of inherited institutions and cultural practices, but as a living question at the heart of Turkish politics and society, a question whose echoes would be heard long after the last sultan left Istanbul. In the early 21st century, the legacy of the Ottoman Empire experienced a striking revival in modern Turkey. This resurgence accelerated under the Justice and Development Party, known as the AKP, after it came to power in 2002. Prime Minister and later President Recep Tayyip Erdogan actively embraced Ottoman symbols and rhetoric, presenting contemporary Turkey as the true inheritor of Ottoman greatness. State-sponsored television dramas celebrated Ottoman sultans and their military conquests, while previously neglected anniversaries of Ottoman victories became national events. Public buildings across Turkey began to feature neo-Ottoman architectural designs, and schools introduced Ottoman Turkish language courses to reconnect young generations with their imperial heritage. These developments divided public opinion. Supporters saw them as a healthy reconnection with history and a path to cultural authenticity, a necessary counterbalance to decades of radical secularism. Critics, however, warned that the Ottoman revival threatened the foundations of the secular republic established by Ataturk, worrying that it signaled a move toward religious conservatism and authoritarianism. Both sides had valid points. The Ottoman past provided a deep reservoir of symbols and traditions that could be adapted for many modern political aims, whether to inspire religious devotion, reinforce Turkish nationalism, or project Turkey's power abroad. Beyond the Turkish heartland, the Ottoman legacy remained just as complicated. In the Balkans, where Ottoman rule had lasted for centuries, national histories usually frame the period as one of foreign occupation and lost potential. Yet the Ottoman impact could still be seen in everyday life, from food, music, and architecture to countless Turkish loanwords in local languages. Among Balkan Muslims, especially in Bosnia, Albania, and North Macedonia, memories of Ottoman times were more often positive, recalling eras of communal autonomy and prosperity. In the Arab world, attitudes shifted over time. Early Arab nationalism defined itself against the Ottoman state, viewing it as a force that suppressed Arab cultural expression and self-rule. After World War I, new borders drawn by European powers divided the Ottoman Arab provinces into separate states, reinforcing the idea of a sharp break with the imperial past. But by the late 20th century, some Arab intellectuals began to reevaluate the Ottoman era, recognizing it as a time of relative regional integration and Islamic governance before the disruptions of European colonialism. After the 2011 Arab Spring, these reassessments accelerated, prompting renewed debate about national identity and alternative models of political organization. In some circles, old Ottoman administrative divisions were even discussed as potentially more natural regional groupings than the borders imposed after World War I. The Ottoman legacy was not only intellectual or political, it remained tangible throughout former imperial territories. Architectural masterpieces, from grand imperial mosques in Istanbul to remote fortresses in the Balkans and caravanserais in Middle Eastern deserts, continued to shape cityscapes and attract restoration efforts. Ottoman urban planning principles still guided the layouts of cities like Sarajevo, Damascus, Thessaloniki, and Baghdad. The empire's culinary heritage persisted as well, with dishes like dolma, börek, baklava, and kufta enjoyed in various forms from Turkey to Greece and across the Middle East and Balkans. Coffee culture, too, which entered Europe via Ottoman lands, remained a central feature of social life. Language bore similar marks of Ottoman influence. Turkish words survived in Balkan, Greek, and Arabic vocabularies, especially in areas related to food, administration, and daily urban life. Despite Ataturk's language reforms, modern Turkish continued to reflect its Ottoman roots, shaped by centuries of multicultural exchange. Religion, too, was deeply marked by the Ottoman past. The legacy of the millet system, where religious communities enjoyed a degree of self-government, influenced minority policies in many successor states, even if only in attenuated form. Mosques, Sufi lodges, and religious schools established during Ottoman times continued to serve new generations, adapting to the demands of modern societies. Thus, long after the empire's end, the Ottoman legacy continued to be claimed, contested, and reimagined. Its influence echoing through architecture, cuisine, language, and the political imagination of peoples from southeastern Europe to the Middle East. In the Balkans and across vast swaths of the former Ottoman world, the legacy of empire continues to shape daily life and political imagination. Centuries of Ottoman rule have left their mark in distinctive Islamic practices, visible today in regional expressions of faith from Bosnia to the Middle East. Many of the region's present-day conflicts, whether the Arab-Israeli struggle, Kurdish nationalism, disputes over Cyprus, or the complex ethnic tensions of the Balkans, can trace some of their origins to Ottoman administrative patterns, population movements, and especially to the disruptive borders drawn by European powers after World War I. These arbitrary frontiers often ignored the more organic Ottoman boundaries that had evolved over centuries to reflect geography and demography. The Ottoman model itself still shapes ideas of governance and identity. For some Islamist movements, the Ottoman Caliphate stands as a powerful symbol of Islamic unity across diverse peoples. Conversely, pan-Arab nationalists sometimes view the post-Ottoman fragmentation of the Arab world as an artificial division that calls for reunification. In the Balkans, memories of Ottoman rule continue to inform debates over European integration and regional identity. In modern Turkey, echoes of neo-Ottomanism periodically emerge in foreign policy, as leaders seek to recapture a sense of imperial influence in former Ottoman territories. Academic understanding of the Ottoman Empire has undergone a profound transformation, where early Western historians once stressed narratives of decline and leaned on Orientalist stereotypes, and where nationalist historians and successor states downplayed Ottoman achievements, recent scholarship has become far more nuanced. Today, historians recognize the sophistication of Ottoman administration, the pragmatic management of religious and ethnic diversity, and the empire's lasting cultural achievements. Access to Ottoman archives, better translations, and interdisciplinary research have opened new perspectives. Meanwhile, popular culture has played a powerful role in shaping public memory. Historical novels, films, and especially Turkish TV series like Magnificent Century, depicting the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, have captivated audiences across former Ottoman lands and beyond, despite frequent historical inaccuracies and political controversy. These productions often tell us as much about contemporary concerns as about the past, but they have sparked new curiosity about Ottoman history. Tourism, too, has revitalized engagement with the imperial past. Landmarks from Topkapi Palace in Istanbul to the Starry Most in Mostar draw millions of visitors, while culinary tourism celebrates Ottoman-influenced cuisines. Restoration projects highlight architectural masterpieces, even as debates continue about the treatment of minorities under Ottoman rule. This relationship with the imperial legacy remains ambivalent, neither simple rejection nor uncritical embrace. In Turkey, as the republic nears its centenary, society draws selectively on Ottoman symbols, achievements, and traditions, adapting them to modern national identity. Across former Ottoman lands, communities continue to negotiate their connections to a shared imperial past that often transcends today's national borders. Despite a century of nation-building that frequently defined itself in opposition to Ottoman cosmopolitanism, traces of imperial patterns persist in unexpected ways. Ultimately, the Ottoman Empire stands as more than just a vanished polity. It remains a living influence, a shared legacy woven into the fabric of countless societies across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The Ottoman Empire stands as a singular example of governance, culture, and identity forged at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, a unique legacy whose strengths and weaknesses, achievements and failures, continue to influence the region and offer lessons for the present. Though the empire itself has faded into history, its impact endures in the lands and peoples shaped by 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. The Ottoman legacy is an indelible part of the mosaic that forms the modern Middle East and Balkans. Perhaps the most important lesson is the extraordinary adaptability of the Ottoman system. From its beginnings as a small frontier principality, through its centuries as a global power, to its final transformation into nation-states, the Ottoman state constantly evolved, absorbing diverse influences, managing complexity, and reinventing its institutions while maintaining core continuities. This ability to change within tradition allowed the empire to endure far longer than most imperial systems. The story of the Ottomans is not just a tale of rise and fall, conquest and defeat. It is a saga of cultural synthesis, pragmatic governance, innovation, and human experience across generations and continents. The Ottoman legacy cannot be reduced to simple judgments or contained by modern national boundaries. It survives in the languages spoken, the food eaten, the buildings inhabited, the religions practiced, and the identities constructed across its former realms. In Istanbul, once Constantinople, the empire's physical heritage is visible in monuments like Hagia Sophia, which has served as Byzantine cathedral, Ottoman mosque, secular museum, and once again as mosque, each transformation adding meaning rather than erasing the past. This palimpsest quality runs through all the empire's former domains, where imperial patterns linger beneath the surface of modern states and politics. A century after its dissolution, Ottoman history can be viewed with greater perspective, neither romanticizing it as a lost golden age nor dismissing it as mere oppression does justice to its complexity. The Ottoman Empire was a deeply human institution, with the full range of triumphs and failures that implies. Its story deserves to be understood on its own terms, not simply as prelude to what followed, but as a significant and ongoing chapter in world history. From a band of Turkish horsemen basically led by a chieftain's vision to one of history's longest-lived empires, the Ottoman experience traces an arc almost mythic in scope. Its dissolution redrew borders, giving rise to new nations, but also leaving wounds and memories that shape politics and identities to this day. Across dozens of countries, people still carry fragments of Ottoman heritage in their daily lives, in their languages, foods, and customs. In Istanbul, the empire's final capital, Ottoman echoes persist in every vista. Minarets and domes trace the skyline. Merchants in the Grand Bazaar ply their trade in spaces built by Mehmed the Conqueror. And along the Bosphorus, wooden Yalu mansions from centuries past still catch the same sea breezes that once cooled Ottoman poets and courtiers. Far beyond Turkey, in Sarajevo, Ottoman bridges still cross the Miljacka River, silent witnesses to centuries of history and events that shaped the world. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire endures in countless ways across the lands it once ruled. In Jerusalem, the magnificent walls built by Suleiman the Magnificent still embrace the old city, sheltering holy sites revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. In Cairo, Ottoman mosques and grand mansions stand as silent witnesses to centuries of history amid the city's constant bustle. Across Athens, Thessaloniki, and towns throughout the Balkans, Ottoman architectural details persist, sometimes celebrated, sometimes quietly overlooked, despite later efforts to erase them. Perhaps the most immediate Ottoman inheritance is found at the dinner table. Turkish kebabs, Greek moussaka, Bosnian burek, Lebanese kibbeh. These flavors, shaped in imperial kitchens, have become part of the daily life of millions, bridging the political borders that were drawn after the empire's fall. The ritual of coffee spread across the region during Ottoman times remains central to social life, from Istanbul to Cairo, Sarajevo to Jerusalem. Less visibly, the Ottoman approach to governance left a profound mark. Centralized bureaucracy, the careful balancing of religious and secular authority, and the strategies for managing diversity all shaped the administrative traditions of successor states. The millet system, for all its hierarchy, offered a form of pluralism that influenced later models of multicultural governance, even when successor regimes denied any continuity. The empire's centuries-long interaction with Europe influenced both sides. Europe defined itself partly in opposition to the Ottomans, but also borrowed eagerly from them, adopting coffee, tulips, and other cultural imports. Conversely, the Ottomans drew on European ideas and methods as they modernized, adapting them to their own needs. This complex two-way exchange still shapes debates over Turkey's identity and its place within or outside of Europe. For historians, the Ottoman Empire is a treasure trove of lessons in imperial longevity, adaptation, and collapse. How did it hold together such a vast and diverse realm for so long? How did it balance tradition with innovation, central control with local autonomy, and religious authority with secular needs? Why did its reforms ultimately fall short? These questions continue to inspire research, offering insights relevant to understanding other complex societies today. For the ordinary people who live in the lands once ruled by the Sultans, the Ottoman past lingers in many ways, sometimes in conscious acts of heritage preservation, sometimes in unspoken customs, family stories, or even in the genetic fabric of the population. Archaeological digs and architectural surveys still reveal traces of the Ottoman presence, even in places where later nationalists tried to erase them. The collapse of the empire ushered in the modern Middle East, with all its unresolved tensions. Borders drawn by outsiders, often without regard for geography or history, created new states that still struggle with questions of legitimacy and identity. The void left by the empire's end was filled by competing ideologies: Arab nationalism, political Islam, each promising an answer to the challenges of the post-Ottoman world. And yet, there remains a sense of loss for the cosmopolitan diversity that once characterized Ottoman cities. Before the homogenizing force of modern nationalism, these urban centers were true mosaics, alive with languages, religions, and cultures mingling in daily life. In the markets, Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Armenian, Ladino, and countless other tongues could be heard. Mosques, churches, and synagogues stood side by side in many neighborhoods. Governance recognized distinct group identities rather than imposing a single uniform citizenship. However imperfect, this pluralism offers a powerful counterpoint to later simplifications. As the muezzins call to prayer echoes over ancient rooftops, as artisans ply their trades passed down through generations, as families share meals with recipes rooted in imperial kitchens, the Ottoman past continues, neither fully embraced nor entirely rejected, woven into the daily rhythms of life across an entire region. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire endures as a profoundly complex inheritance, one that successor societies across southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa continue to grapple with in the present day. It is a ghost that cannot be exorcised, woven as it is into the very fabric of regional identity. While the empire now resides in history, its sultans and subjects, its conquests and defeats, its moments of triumph and tragedy have become the subject of museum exhibits and endless scholarly debates. Yet in countless visible and invisible ways, the patterns established over 6 centuries of Ottoman rule continue to shape the daily realities, institutions, and cultural sensibilities of a vast region. Today's political borders may be sharply drawn, each nation flying its own flag and cultivating its own narrative. But beneath the modern surface, the deep undercurrents of Ottoman influence still flow, quiet, persistent, and unmistakable to those who look closely. And so our journey through the story of the Ottoman Empire draws to a close, not with any final verdict, but with an open invitation to deeper understanding. This empire was never simply the romantic, exotic fantasy imagined by some Western writers, nor was it the pure darkness depicted by nationalist narratives seeking to erase or simplify the past, nor the perfect Islamic state conjured by later religious revisionists. Rather, the Ottoman Empire was a human institution, layered with complexity, contradiction, extraordinary achievement, and undeniable failure. Its history deserves to be recounted neither with uncritical nostalgia nor with sweeping condemnation, but with the nuance and respect that 6 centuries of human striving demand. The sun may have set on the empire, but its influence lingers, subtle and enduring, over the landscapes, the languages, and the cultures of dozens of modern states. As evening falls over the Bosphorus, where Europe and Asia nearly touch, where Constantine once built his new Rome and Mehmed II later established his Islamic capital, where the waters still whisper stories from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, we are reminded that history is not merely a record of what is lost, but a living inheritance. In glimpsing both the grandeur and the humanity of the Ottoman experience, perhaps we can better appreciate the world we inhabit today, shaped in part by the rise, flourishing, and fall of this remarkable empire. If this journey has sparked new questions or reflections, I invite you to keep exploring, to challenge what you think you know, and to join the ongoing conversation about our shared past. Because history is never truly over. It lives on in the choices we make, the stories we tell, and the futures we imagine.